So this is my second update as Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown musician in residence. This week I'm going to just update you on how I'm progressing with the composition, Dún Laoghaire Guitars, and also I've shared a playlist about some of the music I listened to in my teenage years, and I'm going to explain why that's important to me and how it influenced me as a composer and guitarist over the years. So to update you on the composition, last week I explained to you how I started basing the piece on a rhythm, which was the word Dún Laoghaire in a kind of a melodic rhythm. Dún Laoghaire, Dún Laoghaire, Dún Laoghaire. That's the 3 + 3 + 2 rumba rhythm. So now I've got a chord progression to go with that, and I'll just play the chord progression, and then I'll explain a little bit about it. So that's part of what I've written so far, and that'll be like the fundamental chords behind the piece, and I'll be building up the piece with melodies and riffs, as they call them in the guitar world, and there'll be some bass lines and some improvisation around all that. But that's the fundamental basic of what will be like. I'm probably going to make this the third movement, the third kind of part of the overall piece. And so what was I doing there? What are those chords? If you're not a professional musician, you might not be used, might not play these kind of chords, because they're not in. Just say if you're a big fan of Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen or that kind of songwriting, you won't come across these kind of chords very often. And so what you learn. What I would have learned, my first chords were just C, G, or G, D, E minor, A minor, those kind of chords. They're the standard chords that are used in so much music, all types of music, and a lot of composers just use those chords and never move beyond them, and they do perfectly well with them, and they don't need extended chords. But I got interested in these kind of extended harmonies when I was quite young, and they stuck with me ever since, and I used them an awful lot. Say the first chord I used there is called C major 7. There's different ways of playing that chord. Inversions, as they call them, and move on to. That's kind of a version of a G7, but with extra notes on it, and that's an F major 7 with a 6th in it, and this is what they call an 11th chord. Both of these, that's a F11, G11 and A11, and they're also, the easy way to describe them is just like an F chord with a G in the bass, or an A chord, or a G chord with an A in the bass, and then that one's a major 9th chord. So they're the kind of chords I'm basing this piece on. And so I've sent that progression to Kieran and his students, and Kieran tells me they're flying through the chord progressions, which is great. I've written them out in standard notation. I've also done them in guitar tab, which is an easier way for kind of musicians who can't read sheet music to learn about, a notated way of learning guitar. And I would have used guitar tab when I was young, before I learned how to read sheet music. And I've also done a little recording of myself playing them for the students to learn from. So that's where I am with the piece so far. I've done a bit more than that, but I thought that's enough for this week to talk about. And so I'm going to move on by talking about the playlist that I have for this week, and this talks about the music that I listened to as a teenager. And my teenage years were kind of dominated by heavy metal music, and heavy metal gets a bit of a bad rap because I think the outward image of it is it's all really heavy and it's not very sophisticated, and the image of the long hair and the fire and brimstone and all that. But actually heavy metal is a very sophisticated kind of music, and the musicians who play it are generally virtuoso musicians, fantastic guitarists, drummers, singers, bass players. And listening to that kind of music when I was a kid really helped me develop my technique and learning how to play like that. And it also opened my mind to classical music and jazz and folk music, because there's a big influence in those styles in heavy metal, that from the outside, if you haven't really listened to heavy metal properly, you wouldn't realize it, but there's a huge classical influence, and there's a lot of acoustic moments and very melodic moments in between all the really heavy bits. And in that way I think it's quite like classical music, because if you listen to some big orchestral works, some of it's really heavy, and like say the Planet Suite by Gustav Holst, famous piece, it starts with Mars the Bringer of War, which if you transfer it onto a guitar, it's like sounds like. So that to me is basically like heavy metal. The same with the Ride of Spring by Stravinsky. So that you can hear like how when I was a teenager I might have eventually got interested in kind of classical music through that route, through the heavy orchestral music. But then also there's some really melodic parts to heavy metal that is influenced by classical. Some of the guitarists were even classically trained. One great example is Randy Rhoads, who died only 25 in a plane crash, but he was Ozzy Osbourne's guitarist for a few years, and he studied classical music when he was a kid, and he continued to study classical guitar even when he was on the road with Ozzy Osbourne. He would go town by town looking for classical guitar teachers, and probably the best use of classical guitar in an Ozzy Osbourne song is Diary of a Madman, which starts like this. So that is the harmony of that, the progression is basically, he took it from a guitar etude by the classical composer Leo Brouwer, which is and so on. So it's interesting how something like that can move into heavy metal. And it's the same, like on the playlist I've got all the major heavy metal bands, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Slayer even, and most of the pieces I put there have some kind of element where it can be heavy, but also has moments that are melodic, like the Iron Maiden. On the Spotify playlist I have an Iron Maiden piece called The Prophecy, which starts like that. They have another piece like towards the end of the piece, and it goes all classical like. so those kind of things are found all over the classical, all over the heavy metal music, and Metallica use an awful lot. Like say the start of Battery is almost like a Spanish guitar intro, and they use it nylon string guitars for it. This is kind of an almost Baroque like thing. What is it? Yeah. And then say Slayer, or one of the heaviest bands there is. And ironic thing about Slayer is their lead singer, Tom Araya, is a devout Christian, but Slayer are known for kind of demonic songs, and often get mistaken as devil worshippers. But the irony is that he's a devout Christian, and to him it's just it's just a fiction, a job that he does, and a role he plays. But so some of their music is pretty dark sounding, but like there's a song called Seasons in the Abyss, which is almost, the music that it comes out of is almost like flamenco, because they're in flamenco you might get this kind of that kind of a thing, and in Seasons in the Abyss it starts like this. Goes into the main riff, as they call it. And again, that's not too far away from flamenco kind of feel. So there's those influences all over heavy metal, and I think without heavy metal I would definitely not have become the guitarist I am and the musician, composer I am. I don't really listen to it much anymore, but I enjoyed actually going back and listening to some of the music I listened to then. Another person I listened to a lot then, which we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, was Joe Satriani, a real guitar virtuoso. Some of his music is hard rock, some influences from heavy metal in him too, but he did a lot of unusually beautiful guitar music for the genre, I suppose, and he also did he had this technique that I learned a lot of at the time. It was 2-finger tapping. It sounds much nicer on an electric guitar. There's something about the nylon string guitar that it doesn't really, you get extra notes in there, but it has its own kind of technique. So I would have learned that kind of a thing too. So that's my exploration of my heavy metal teenage years. I've got a video now to watch, which is what I call the Melodic Metal Medley, and I've just taken some of the excerpts I played there and a few other pieces and stuck them together as a kind of like a classical guitar tribute to Metallica and Iron Maiden and Slayer and Ozzy Osbourne and all those kind of bands. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope this chat has opened your mind a bit to heavy metal if you were afraid of it or didn't know much about it before, and if you do like heavy metal, well, I hope you enjoyed my classical folky take on it. And if you have any comments, requests for my next videos, anything you'd like to know about the way I play, or anything like that, just send some comments in the YouTube or Facebook, or you can email me, dave@daveflynn.com. So thanks for watching, and here's my Melodic Metal Medley.